And as for the boxing ring, maybe some of you are visitors. This is the last day of the boxing ring. Some of you are sad and some of you are happy. I understand. It's not your thing. I get it. I totally get it. But the reality of the boxing ring, of the comeback, is this idea of sometimes we get knocked down. Sometimes we get pushed down. Sometimes we get a hit or an uppercut or a jab that we didn't see, and we find ourselves laying on the ground. And the boxing adage comes and says this, that the round is not over, the fight is not over when you fall down, but it's over when you decide not to get back up. And so this whole 6 weeks, ending in today, we've been looking at and talking about when we get knocked down, how do we get back up? And this is, of course, for each one of us personally. This is for all of us as the body of First Baptist Church. And this is for really the whole church body of the world. We get knocked down every time, every day, in a million different ways. If you read the news now, we have literally airlines that are no longer flying into a state of North Carolina. We have people that are forbidding semis to drive through because of their statement of certain beliefs. But in this, no matter, it's not really a Christian idea, it is actually a political party and kind of a political thing, but now Christians are getting lumped into this. Oh, those God lovers, they just hate everybody. They want everybody to be like them. No. If everybody looked like me, it would be a fantastic looking church, but it would be kind of different, you know? You know how much chicken you'd have to have at a potluck? If everybody looked like me, it'd be unbelievable. But the reality is that from every way, personally, as a First Baptist church body, as a church body, we're always getting jabbed. We're always getting kind of knocked out. And we have to stop, look, and remember that the fight is already won, and stand up and keep boxing. And so with this idea of really thinking about kind of how this series plays out, I want to point to something today, maybe a little bit different. And don't get scared when you see the scripture, because we're going to it's a couple stories put into one. But for many of us in this room, these are super, super familiar stories that Jesus told. But I want to encourage you, maybe looking at them slightly different as we finish up the comeback of coming off Spring-a-Palooza, after coming off sharing the gospel and being one church under one name, sharing for one purpose, that we would do something phenomenal. So in this morning, I encourage you, if you have your scriptures, to open up to the book of Luke chapter 15. Luke chapter 15. Luke chapter 15 is really, Jesus is talking in this whole chapter. And in this whole chapter that we're looking at this morning, he tells 3 different stories. But he's telling them to one crowd for one purpose. And like I said, for many of you this morning, you know these stories. Many of you could almost quote these word for word. But I want to encourage you just to hang on and stay with me this morning. In Luke chapter 15, we come on the scene of Jesus just gets done talking about what does it cost to be a disciple, to be a follower, to be a student of Him. And so he's going on and he's basically saying, I demand everything. You have to be sold out, lover of me and believer of me in order to be my disciple. Anything else less, I will not accept. And during this time of speaking, there's a bunch of Pharisees, there's a bunch of religious people. There's the stiff-necked people at the church that says, well, I think Christianity should be. And we call these the Pharisees of that day. And the Pharisees are there, and they're sitting in chapter 15, verse 1, it says this, Now the tax collectors and the sinners were all gathering around him to hear. But the Pharisees and teachers of the law muttered, This man welcomes sinners and eats with them. We start the story out with these stiff-necked church people that says, oh my goodness, he's talking to bad people, to the dirty people, to the people of the community and the village. And they're like, how dare he degrade himself by stooping that low? And so Jesus hears this, and then he starts in these 3 different stories. And what you have to remember as we look at these stories, he's talking to them, okay? He's telling these, what we call in the Bible, parables, but basically a story with characters and settings, but they have a deeper meaning, okay? I've said this before, it's like almost any Disney movie you watch. Those are great parables. They're a great story with Elsa and Anna and Olaf, but at the end of the day, sisters stick together, right? Oh, it's love is overconquering. We have all these things that we can take away, and oh, that's so great, right? Just let it go, right? Here we go. So, we start in verse 3. Let's skip verse 3. Let's go to verse 8. And so, I'm sorry, I'm totally lying. I messed up. Let's start at verse 3. Let's start at verse 3. So he's talking to these Pharisees, and he's talking to these people, and he starts this one story. And he says this, suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Does he not leave the 99 in open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. Then he calls his friends and his neighbors together and says, rejoice with me, I have found my lost sheep. I tell you that in the same way that there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent. So Jesus is talking to these stiff-necked, popping the collar church people. I am so spiritual, let me pray for you, amen. Those type of people. And they're I can't believe Jesus is talking to these people. And Jesus starts with the story of this shepherd. He said, imagine that you were a shepherd. Now remember, he's talking to the Pharisees, the richest, the biggest political people of all time, in which a shepherd, and you may remember around the Christmas time when the shepherds come to the manger, shepherds were not good people. You never wanted to say, I hope Johnny grows up to be a shepherd. No. Shepherds were bad. Usually shepherds were people who were in prison and let go. A lot of times these were the people that nobody really wanted them to be in their town and their village, so they would hire them at very low wages so that they would take their flocks and walk them all around the countryside, feeding them and moving them and growing them bigger and giving them time for their wool to grow. And at a certain time, that shepherd would bring them back to town so they could shear them or slaughter them or sell them for the temple. And then they would do the exact same. And so basically, you get this idea that Jesus is telling the most richest, biggest political people at the time that's trying to kill him. He says, imagine yourself being a murderer or a rapist. No, sir, I can't even imagine that. And we get this idea. So Jesus already, first word, he gives them a little jab. And we all do that, right? Somebody says something and you can just give a little, you're kind of nice about it, but you're kind of doing it. We see that with Jesus. Imagine yourself to be the most hated person that you know. And then the story goes on. So the shepherd has 100 sheep. And he starts to count because that's what the shepherd was hired to do. And the reality is, these low, poorly people that were kind of the disgrace of the village, when you got hired as a shepherd, you would count them off. And so the owner of the sheep and the shepherd would go through and they would count their sheep. 1, 2, and so this one has 100. And what happens is when that shepherd returned back at the sheep gate, the owner of the sheep and the shepherd would go through and count them as they go in. If you took out 100, you better bring 100 back. If you didn't, every sheep would be taken off of your pay wage. Okay? Which could in turn mean that if something drastic happened, if a pride of lions or a bunch of bears or a freak lightning storm came and fried all your lamb chops, and you go back and you start out with 100 and you bring back 90, what that really means is that shepherd could have worked for a whole season and could have still owned the sheep owner because he lost his money. Sheep were money at that time. And so this is really crazy. And so the story of Jesus saying is, imagine this shepherd, he has 100 sheep. He counts them, 99. He probably recounts them again. Oh, no, 99. Third time, 99. Okay, so it says, well, would that shepherd not go out and find the one lost one? Well, of course they would, okay? Of course he would. This is his job. You could imagine if you were paid at a yearly total, you would work all year long, and on December 31st, your employer wrote you a check. But whatever you do, if they found out that you didn't do all of your job, they would start subtracting things. That would make you do a lot better job. Because you could work a whole year, and at the end, if you didn't do whatever your job is, you can never get paid, right? You might just lose $100. Oh, big deal. Just give me my $50,000. But if you had big things, you keep going down, you could work a whole year and end up owing your employer money. That would be a fun time, It's kind of like the IRS now, right? It just kind of works out the same way. And so we get this idea that he says, well, of course he would do it. So what he does, he finds a big field, probably where there's nothing around, that probably for a distance, the shepherd can look at his sheep and make sure there's no bad guys coming around, no thieves coming around, there's no lions or bears or bad weather. And so probably for a long time of walking, he can kind of keep just the, very glimpse of his sheep and make sure they're safe. But at some point, he will have to leave them if he cannot find his sheep. And so the story goes on and says, well, of course he will go after the sheep until he finds it. And then verse 5, he says, but when he finds the sheep, what does he do? He says he joyfully puts him on his shoulders and goes home. He goes home. So we get this story of the shepherd who goes and he finds the sheep. He's so, oh my gosh, I'm so thrilled I found you. You are worth money to this shepherd. It's something big. And it says that he joyfully puts him on his shoulders, which at that time we get the story of basically the shepherd would have laid the sheep over, tied both legs, front together and the back together, and would have put him over his shoulders with his stomach on the back of his head and carried him home. Now, see, we all love that story. Many of us have that manger scene at our house where we see a little shepherd boy with a lamb around his neck, and we're like, that's just baby Jesus and that shepherd. It's so cute. Right? We have that. We all have that in our nativity. But that's not the picture that's being painted. It's not a lamb. They don't send a lamb out to graze in the countryside. He would be eaten just like that. He would get lost. You wouldn't do that. These are full-grown adult sheep. If you've ever seen a grown sheep, there's some house cats. Okay? The reality is adult sheep weighs around 100 pounds. So this shepherd, who has now wandered away from all 99 of his sheep, now grabs him, ties his thing, and then picks up this 100-pound sheep, puts him on his shoulder. We have no long how long he walked, but he walks, and he doesn't go back to his flock. He goes home. And when it says he goes home, that gives us the picture of that it's already nighttime. Okay? Because shepherds at that time, a lot of times they didn't stay out in the fields because that would be too dangerous. Things would come, get their sheep, they couldn't do that. And they would go outside of cities where they have sheep gates and sheep pens, and they would kind of rent time. And so we get this picture that he's going back to town, he's going home with this one sheep, because why? He finds his friends and his neighbors, and he says to them, rejoice with me, I have found my lost sheep. This man goes back to a small village where people probably knew him, and he calls him. He says, celebrate with me. I have found what was lost. It is great. I'm not going to be penalized. I'm still going to get paid for all of this, and I have returned the sheep. Then he goes on to tell a second story, starting in verse 8. Or suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. Does she not light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? When she finds it, she calls her friends and neighbors together and says, rejoice with me, I have found my lost coin. In the same way, I tell you, there is rejoicing in the presence of angels of God over one sinner who repents. So remember, Jesus is telling stories to the Pharisees, to these stiff-necked people. And Jesus goes to him first and says, hey, imagine yourself as a murderer, rapist, somebody that the village hates, that you really consider unworthy of even heavenly thoughts. Well, I could never be a shepherd. And he kind of just jabs them. And now he talks to these same men and say, hey, imagine this, churchmen. How about you're a poor woman? Another little jab by Jesus. Not only do they hate shepherds, but at this time, and even today in the Middle Eastern, women are looked as insignificant. They're just property. And so not only is he telling these Pharisees, hey, imagine yourself a woman, worthless, pitiful. Not only you're a woman, you're a poor woman. You're just somebody who has very little money. Well, how can you say that? He's talking to the richest men of the time. So once again, Jesus gives a little jab. He says, suppose that your woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. These silver coins at this time would have been the drachma. Okay, it's a Roman coin. And basically, a drachma is 1 day's wage. So whatever you make, divide that by 365, and that's what the drachma is to you today. And so you have 10. Okay? So let's say you make $100 a day, just because I'm not that great in math and we'll have to work this out, right? So you have $1,000. That's the only thing you have. That's all the money you have in your checking account. Many of you are like me. I wish I had $1,000 in my checking account. Thank you, Jesus, right? I mean, that's who we are. But that's all she had, right? And at this time, what probably happened is when this woman got married, her dad would have gave her a kind of a gift. And this gift was probably these 10 coins. Okay, because at that time, women didn't owe money, those types of things. And so what they would do a lot of times in the Middle Eastern culture is these coins, they would make them into a necklace or to a headpiece, and these coins, which are real money, would hang from them. So it would kind of be like, ladies, if you lost a diamond in your wedding ring, what would you do? Right? I can speak to this because just a couple weeks ago, Laura sent me a picture of her wedding ring that was made by her grandma's rings, her mom's rings, and one of my rings, and we all put them together and made this new ring. And she sends me a picture of it, and it's missing a diamond. Ugh. To me, I'm like, great, now I got to spend more money. To Laura, that means so much more. You know, I'm just like, got to buy more diamonds. Imagine that, right? Yeah, I get that picture. And so we're instantly going back. Do you remember hitting your hand? Do you remember doing this? And so we get home, and what do? Because I'm brilliant, and I watch a lot of MacGyvers in my life growing up. I said, here's what we need to do, babe. We need to basically take everything off the floor, and we need to vacuum our house like 50,000 times. Because we have like big kind of like weird shag, not like the green shag that some of you had in your house back in the day, but we're not going there. But I have like kind of, it's big, thick carpet, right? So I said, let's vacuum. So we vacuumed the house like 100 times. And then what do? We take it out, and now we're pouring this kind of stuff on paper, and we're sifting through all this dirt. Sorry, babe, our house is dirty, right? We're sifting through all this dirt and everything, Cheerios and all this stuff, and we're looking for that diamond. Because why? For one, Sean doesn't want to spend any more money. Two, that really means something to Laura. It could have been her grandma's, her mom's, or something from me. I don't remember what originally was whose. I'm sure she does. But we do all of this, and guess what? We didn't find it. Yeah, I have to spend more money. It physically hurts me when I have to say that, right? But that doesn't happen. But that's what they do. So Jesus is talking to these men. He says, hey, imagine yourself a poor woman. A woman who really has 10 things in her life, okay? She has really the most important thing of her life. Not only is it money, but it's something that was given to her when she got married from her father, and she's lost one. And what does he say? He says, does she not light a lamp, sweep the house, and search it carefully until she finds it? She lights a lamp because in this time and culture, houses didn't have windows. They didn't have these types of things. It was just kind of walls and a roof. And so even in the daytime, she lights a lamp and she's looking everywhere. She's looking underneath the bed. She's looking in the couch cushions. She's looking in the refrigerator. At my house, if the remote is missing, it's always in the refrigerator. I have no idea why, but it's always on the bottom shelf, so I'm blaming my kids. But that's where it's always at. And so, right, she's looking everywhere for this coin. She lights a lamp, which they wouldn't have done because it would have been a waste of oil in the daytime. And not only then, she gets out a broom, and she's sweeping everywhere because it's not like she has a nice tiled floor. It's dirt. It is a hard, dirt-packed floor. And so she's sweeping everything, making a huge pile of all the loose dirt and all the stuff that is on the ground, and then she's going to pick it up and sift through it just like me and Laura did for her diamond. And so she does that. She sweeps everything. And in verse 9, when she finds it, she calls her friends and neighbors together and says, rejoice with me, I found my lost coin. Because people in small towns and villages, many of you probably at one time lived in the country or something, they just kind of care, You can imagine today, you're outside getting your newspaper and your neighbor comes out and says, woo, I found my keys. And you're like, I don't care, I need coffee. And you're going back in because we don't care. But at this time, she does that and it says her friends and her neighbor, both are in feminine terms. So which means she called her girlfriends, and they came out, and they had a little party. I'm so glad. I was so worried for that. I'm so glad you found that. I know that means a lot to you. happens. And it says, in the same way I tell you, Jesus is once again talking to the Pharisees, there's rejoicing in the presence of angels over one sinner who repents. And then, starting in verse 11, and we're going to kind of skip through this because for many of you, you know this story. This is like the VBS story of all VBS stories. This is the Sunday school story of all stories. And this is called the prodigal son. It's the lost son. And we get a story. Jesus starts telling a picture, and he says this. There was a man who had two sons. You got to think, once again, he's talking to the Pharisees, and there's like, well, I can get behind this story. I'm not a murderer, rapist, shepherd. I'm not a poor woman, but now I'm a man who has two sons. In that culture, it would have been great to have sons. The more sons, the more rich that you would be. And so he says, okay, I can get behind this. And so Jesus says, there was a man who had two sons. The younger one said to his father, Father, give me the share of your estate. So he divided his property between them. Now, a lot can be said here, but quickly, as a father, this hasn't happened to me yet. As a son, yeah, I can say I've probably done this, and for many of you, you've probably experienced this. At some point in your life, you've probably said something to your parents that has totally ripped out their heart. And here we get this picture that there's a man who has two sons. And it says, Jesus says, imagine one of those sons coming to his father and say, Dad, I wish you were dead so I could have your money. Now we can stop right there and talk about Sean's family. Somebody be laying on the floor knocked out cold. Okay, I'm just telling you how it is. I love you in Jesus' name. But you can imagine your son walking up to you and saying, Dad, I wish you'd hurry up and die so I can have your money. Bye. Whatever. I mean, can you imagine? But that's what he says. Instead of that dad hitting him, getting crazy, getting irate, his dad does this. And he says he basically liquidates everything that he has. And we find out later in the story he's a farmer. So he would have basically liquidated all of his cattle, all of his sheep, everything, and came down to one price point. What is all my land worth? What is all my sheep worth? My goats, my cows, my camels, all the people that work for me, my business. Liquidate everything and then say, okay, it's worth $1 million. And he writes his son a check of $500,000. Says, here you go, son. It's what you wanted. It's what you get. Not long after that, the younger son got all together he had, and he set off for a distant country and squandered his wealth in wild living. Much like all of us, when we get stuff, we spend it, right? We squander it. It's really funny. I remember the first time we took our family to Disney World. And our kids, they have piggy banks, and they do everything. And we went to Disney World. The whole point is they save up all year, all birthday, all Christmas, all just because Grandma loves you, gives you money. You know how it is, grandmas. You just send dollar bills just because it's fun to do. I don't know. Right? They save all of this, and then we go to Disney World, and we start riding rides, and we go in the shops like, oh, I want that. We're like, okay, that's $30. That leaves you $20. I don't really want that. And literally, I can remember through a whole week at Disney World, we're literally the last night, like at midnight, standing in a store saying, this is your last chance, kid, to spend your money. You're not getting it. And literally, they saved it all the way to the end and everything. Oh, I want that. Okay, well, I'll leave you. Oh, no, I don't want that. Because why? They wanted to squander my money and spend my money that I was going to spend on Mickey ice cream bars that are so delicious. Right? They wanted to spend my money, but when it came to theirs, let's save it. Let's keep it. But here we get a young man who gets $500,000, let's say. And what does he do? He has a great time. He does whatever he wants to do. He says he goes off into a distant country and just blows it. After he'd spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he became in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country who sent him to the fields to feed pigs. To feed pigs. Jesus is talking to Pharisees. They are Jews. They're no longer they can't have pork, they can't have bacon. That's why they're so angry, okay? I'm just throwing that out. They're just angry. They can't have bacon and ham, okay? And so they can't have this. And so this story where the Pharisees are like, well, okay, I can kind of get that there's a man, two sons, I can get behind this. And now it says, now imagine this guy sells everything and now he's feeding pigs. Literally, these men would rather die than to even be close to a pig. I can't do that. That would make me ceremonial unclean and I'd have to da-da-da-da-da-da. But Jesus is telling the story. So imagine this. He sells himself to be a pig farmer. And it says this, he longed to fill his stomach with the slop that the pigs were eating, but no one would give him anything. But when he came to his senses, he said, how many of my father's hired men have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son, but make me one of your staff. So he got up and went to his father. And so here's this young man who's blown his inheritance, and he's sitting there, and he's basically looking at the slop of feeding the pigs, and he's just like, oh, I'm so hungry. Man, is that a banana peel? I wonder if I could just get some extra banana out of it. And he comes to his senses and says, this is ridiculous. The men that my dad employs, they go to bed at night with extra food on their table. And I'm here in the pigs, and I'm really looking at this bucket of slop thinking, maybe I can get some extra banana out of the peel. This is ridiculous. So he came with this idea and said, I'm going to go home. And it says he got up and he set out, and he's the whole way he's talking. He's trying to figure out, okay, I just told my dad I wish he was dead. I just told my dad I want all his money. And now I'm going back and I'm saying, Dad, I'm not your son. I'm not here as your son anymore. I know I'm dead to you. But please, kind sir, hire me. I'll be your slave. I will work for you. I will do the worst job. I will clean out the farmer's outhouse if I have to. But that will give me more than what I have right now. And you can imagine the son, and he's walking back to his father's farm. But it says in verse 20, but while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him, and he ran to his son, threw his arms in around him, and kissed him. Now, there's so much, and so many sermons have preached about this, so I'm not saying anything that's never been said, but we get this idea of this father, and it says he sees his son a long way off. It's not like he broke out his Nikon binoculars and was like, hey, how you going? This is 2,000 years ago. Kind of difficult, okay? It not existed yet, right? We kind of have this. What we do is we get a picture of a father who is going along his farm and talking to his field workers and doing stuff, but we get this picture that occasionally he looks to the horizon hoping he can see a silhouette of a guy, of someone coming. And we get the picture, that's what he sees. He sees a silhouette. And it says that he goes after him. And you can imagine the son walking home to his father, saying in his mind, I'm not your son anymore, Dad. I know, but just hire me. And he says, they're both, Dad's going this way, the son's walking this way. And at some point, that son would have to be like, who's this old man running towards me? Is that my dad? And you have to imagine he's thinking everything in his mind and thinking about, is my dad going to hit me? Is he going to beat me? Is he going to tell me to get out of here? What's going on? And all of a sudden we see that as they get closer, and probably as this old man is speeding towards him, he's like, Dad, I know, just I just want to work for you. I just want to work for you. And all of a sudden the dad keeps running, and instead of tackling him, instead of hitting, instead of doing a round fly house kick of Chuck Norris, he embraces him. He just hugs him. Not like some little, like bro hugs. Like, what's going on? I mean, this is like full-fledged, probably tackle, arms and legs, knocks him down. And he says to the son, he says to him, after this happens, he says, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called son. But the father said to his servants, so the son is sitting there, Dad, I know I'm not your son. I'm so sorry. I just want to work for you. Just please hire me at minimum wage. Hire me under minimum wage. I don't care. And at this time, the dad is paying no attention to his son. And it says that he calls to his servants. He calls to his other workers. Bring the best robe and put it on him. Bring the ring. Bring his sandals. Kill the fattened calf and kill it, because we're going to party. We're going to have a festival, and we're going to celebrate that my son has returned. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So they begin to celebrate. The reality is the comeback. We've looked at Moses. We've looked at Solomon. We've looked at Saul last week. We've looked at the power that Jesus had through the resurrection. But when we think about a comeback, for many of you in this room, you can look back and you yourself have had a comeback. Probably many. But on the spiritual comeback of that point where you can say, I was lost, but now I'm found. And so what I want you to think about these stories is this. Jesus is telling these Pharisees, these religious people, imagine yourself as these people. Because here's what God's really like. So all Jesus tried to do is always give them a picture, give them a clue of what God was like. And so he talks about the lost sheep, the shepherd that went out. And I would say this story teaches us this, that a lot of people don't know they're lost. A lot of people don't know they're lost. And what I mean by that is this, is maybe at some point they've just wandered off. At some point, they found themselves in a situation and kind of like, oh my goodness, how did I get here? Right? There was a great commercial that aired in many different commercials. It was a satellite commercial. And we would see the guy who would be like, oh, because his cable didn't work, and then he got on the bus. And then because he got on the bus, he fell asleep. And then he got off in the wrong seat and got beat up, and now he's laying in a ditch. And at the very end it says, that's why you need satellite, or something like that, right? We saw a lot of those commercials. You know, we get this idea. We find ourselves, people find themselves in situations that says, oh my gosh, I used to go to church, I used to know God, I used to have this, but I've kind of just wandered off. How have I even gotten here? How have I even gotten in this hole? And what I would say was that the lost sheep story is this, is because they really don't know how they got there, and because they were a part of the sheep herd, they were part of the church, because they're actually there, sometimes those sheep, they don't need lectures. They don't need you to go to them, blah, 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 blah. They need you to come alongside of them and say, look, there's the shepherd. Let's go back home. And for some of us today, we know people like that. For some of you in this room who are Sunday school teachers like myself, it's really easy because, wow, you check a roll every morning. And you have a Sunday school roll of 50 people and you check 9 people. Where's the other 41 people? Where are they at? Sometimes we just need to go to them and say, hey, look, there's a shepherd. Let's go home. You want to? All right. So Jesus is using that for us. Not for them. They don't know they're lost. They've just kind of wandered off. Say, hey, there's the shepherd. There's Jesus. Let's go back and make it right. Let's go home. Then we have the story of the lost coin. The story of the lost coin is kind of funny because it's not a person, it's not an animal, it's a coin. What is she going to say to the coin? She finds a coin, bad coin, don't you ever hide from mama no more. No, you won't, you're such a bad. What is she going to do? I mean, really, it's a coin. What is she going to do? You know what she's going to do? She's not going to do anything to that coin. You know what she is going to do? She's going to protect and keep watch over those coins much harder. And we've all had that. We've all had things that we lost, right? If you're a grown adult, you've lost one of 2 things in your life multiple times. Keys or the remote control. I would say the remote control is more invaluable than my keys to my car, but that's up to you. You figure out, right? And after you keep doing this, eventually, hopefully, you get smart, or at least your wife helps you become smart. And she says, honey, I bought this key hook for you right next to the door. When you come in, hang your keys on it, right? Honey, when you sit in your recliner, you know you fall asleep and it falls off your belly and falls down in here. So if it's lost, look there first, honey. It's right there. It always is, right? We kind of have this, right? We keep and we watch, and we don't want to lose the remote control or our keys. And we all know people who are grown adults. I'm not going to say anybody, but I can imagine some of you. Once a week, you're like, has anybody seen my keys? Oh, yeah, Mom. They were walking down the hall to the bathroom. They had to go. They'll be back in a minute. Mom, they're wherever you left them. Come on, get it together, woman. Right? We have this idea. What's she going to say? And what this shows us is this. There are people in our families, there's people in this neighborhood that honestly, because we, including myself, we haven't kept a good watch over them. And we've let them walk away. We've let them slip through our fingers. Some of them people were not valuable enough to know when they're missing. And instead of know when they're missing, instead of going and vacuuming and sweeping the corners and lighting lights and looking under the couch, we just, that's okay. It's only 10%. I still got 90%. We're pretty good. It's not what Jesus is saying. Jesus is saying the one is just as important as the 99. The one coin is just as important as the other 9. So with the lost sheep, some people don't know they're lost. With the lost coin, some people are lost because of us. Maybe they have walked away. Maybe they've wandered away. But to us, they weren't that important. See, the shepherd thought about that one and went and got him. But for a lot of us, we don't think about them anymore. They're not here. I haven't seen them in a couple months. I don't know. Hello? What do you mean you don't know? You have Facebook. Literally, it's like a 3-second type. Hello. Hey, where you been? Miss you at church. Love to talk to you. Coffee, lunch, supper, parcheesi, whatever you want. I don't care. Hey, where have you been? And then the third one, the lost son, is that I think this teaches us that some people are purposely lost. Some people know the gospel. Some people knows the Father, and yet they still go to the Father and say, I wish you were dead. I want to live life on my own. And they walk away. And they go and do everything, and they party, and they squander their money, and they do whatever, but they purposely walked away from the Father. But at some point, as looking at the pig slop, looking at that banana, this man said, this is ridiculous. Something moved in his mind, in his emotions, and said, this is ridiculous. He stood up in his mess, and he went home to his father to say, Father, I'm so sorry. I know I'm not your son anymore. I know I'm not even worthy of anything that you have, but I will sleep not only in the worker's house, I'll sleep behind the worker's house with the cat and the dog and that weird donkey, but it's still better than what I've had. And so for that lost son, he had to make that decision. And what's really crazy is when you read that story, we're like, oh, well, what's going on? The father knew where he was at the whole time. You don't think if somebody came up to you and said, Dad, I wish you were dead. Give me half your money and you do this. You don't think all of your neighbors and the people you go to church with are going to keep you on what's happening? Yeah, we're good at that, right? Oh, well, I saw on Facebook, your son was in Vegas and he was, don't tell anybody else, and then it's in prayer meeting. We need to pray for Sean's son. He done crazy. He's in Taipan. He was doing something with a snake. I don't even know. I think he's gone, whatever, right? This is what we do. He would have known. The father would have known where his son at. The father could have easily went to his son and said, what are you doing? But he didn't. Because it took something for that son to stand up in his mess, in his muck, and say, I'm not even worthy, but I need to go back home to my dad. This morning, the question is, are you looking for a comeback? Every week we've been talking about that we personally need comebacks. And we've looked at how Moses messed up and he came back through God's power. We looked at Solomon, who was the smartest man in the world, and he tried and did everything. And when he got to the end, he said, it was only through God that did this. We looked on Easter that Jesus' power is so great and so powerful. He's the only person ever that could defeat the grave. And he did so that we could have the power to have a comeback. Last week we looked at a man who literally killed thousands upon Christians, met Jesus, and said, I'm completely turning around. This was ridiculous. I'm so sorry. And become literally the greatest preacher and author for Jesus Christ. Everybody had a comeback. In our life, for me in this room, we are saved. We know Jesus Christ is our Lord and Savior. We have had a comeback. But that's not the question this morning. The question is, are you looking for a comeback? Are you like the lost sheep? You know of people that have walked away from the herd, walked away from the flock, and we simply just need to go to them and say, where have you been? I've been missing you. I've been praying for you. See Jesus? He's the shepherd. Let's just go back home. Quit doing this crazy stuff. Just come with me. Maybe we need to be like the lost coin. That some of us that were here and they know and they've gone away and maybe it's been for a long time. But we need to care about them enough to be able to look and say, I used to have 10 coins. I I used to have 10 people in my small group. I used to have 10 people that I went out to lunch with. And now I only have 9. Where's the one? And do whatever it takes to find the one. Or maybe we know somebody like the lost son who has chose on their own behalf to purposely walk away from God, to go out and to do their thing. And that's what all non-Christians do. They live their life. They don't care about God. They live their life. They're doing their things, and they're choosing. But at some point, God will hopefully intercede in their life, and they will listen, and they will know that it's God, and that they will turn around and say, God, I know I'm not worthy. I know I'm not worthy. You look at my life, look at all the things I've done. I've done this and I've done that. And I basically told you, I wish you were dead. I want to do my own thing. I know I'm not worthy, God, but please just let me sleep behind your worker's house. Let me have the bottom glimpse of glory. I don't have to go all the way into heaven, but let my little toe go into heaven. Scripture says here and many other places that God says no. Boom, bear hugs, knocks you down. And He says, hey, get the robe, get the sandals, get the ring. He's not going to put one toe, a little toe in heaven. He's not going to sleep behind the farmer's shed, the workhouse. He's not sleeping with that weird donkey. He's going to sleep in my house because He's my son. He's my daughter. Coming off Spring of Palooza. Yeah, we shared the gospel. That was awesome. That was great. Yay. Go Jesus. That's what we should do. But do we care about the lost sheep? Do we care about the lost coin? And do we care about the lost son? I hope you do. And this morning I encourage you to think about who are those people. And maybe you write them down in a prayer journal. Maybe you write them on a Post-it note and stick them on your dash in your car. Maybe you do whatever, but don't forget this moment, because many of you already have people in your minds. Yeah, I know, they just they went to another church, but they don't really go. So you're just letting them flounder and live in sin and not tell them about Jesus? Yeah, that's a great idea. No, it's a bad idea. Jesus cared enough for the sheep, the coin, and the son. And so should we. Let's pray. Father, we love you.